I never thought I'd experience real fear until the night I spent alone at my uncle's cabin. It was supposed to be a simple favor: watch the place for a few nights while he was out of town. He paid me, stocked the fridge with my favorite snacks, and even let me bring my dog, Max. Seemed like a win-win. The cabin was tucked deep in the woods, about 30 minutes from the nearest town. No neighbors, no streetlights, just trees and silence. I'd stayed there a few times before, but never alone. Still, I wasn't nervous. I actually liked the solitude. That changed the second night. I had just finished dinner when Max started acting strange. His ears perked up, his body stiffened, and he let out a low growl. He was staring at the back door, the one that led to the woods. I turned off the TV and listened. Silence. The only thing I could hear was the wind through the trees. Then Max barked. Loud, aggressive. I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the back door. Peering out through the small window, I saw nothing but darkness. Then I saw movement. A shadow shifting just past the tree line. I flicked on the porch light, but it barely reached beyond the deck. I pressed my face against the glass, squinting into the night. That's when I saw them. Two figures, standing just beyond the light's reach. Still, watching. A cold chill ran down my spine. I locked the door, grabbed my phone, and called my uncle. Straight to voicemail, no signal. I had Wi-Fi, but calling over the internet was spotty at best. Max was still growling, his body tense. I tried to shake off the fear. Maybe it was just hikers or hunters passing through. Then came the knock. Not from the back door, from the front. Slow, deliberate. I turned to face the sound, my breath caught in my throat. There was no reason for anyone to be out here. No delivery guys, no lost travelers. Another knock. I took a step forward, then stopped. The front door didn't have a window. If I opened it, I wouldn't know who or what was waiting on the other side. I turned off the lights. Maybe if I stayed quiet, they'd go away. Then came the whisper. "Let us in." It was a woman's voice, soft, almost pleading. I didn't move. "Please," the voice said again. "We need help." Max barked, the sound loud and furious. Then, silence. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, nothing. I dared to peek out the window, scanning the darkness for any movement. The porch was empty. The woods were still. Maybe they left. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself it was over. Then my stomach dropped. The back door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and crept toward the door. Max was right behind me, his fur bristled. The door was slightly open. Someone had been inside. I flicked on the light and scanned the room. Nothing looked out of place. Then I noticed something on the floor, a wet footprint. Bare. I felt sick. Slowly, I backed out of the kitchen, gripping the poker so tightly my knuckles ached. I made my way to the bedroom and locked the door. Max was whining, but I hushed him, listening for any sound outside. The house was silent. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Not Max's. Right outside my door. My heart slammed against my ribs as I gripped my phone, praying for even a single bar of service. Nothing. I had no idea how long I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. Then, footsteps, moving away. I waited, barely daring to breathe. Finally, I worked up the courage to crack the door open. The house was empty. The front door was wide open. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, Max's leash, and ran to my truck. I didn't care if I left the place unlocked. I didn't care about my stuff, I just wanted out. As I sped down the dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For just a second, I saw them, standing at the edge of the woods, watching. I didn't slow down, I didn't stop. I never told my uncle what happened, just made an excuse, said I wasn't feeling well and had to leave early. A week later, he called me, asked if I had left the back door open. I told him no. He said when he got back, the door was swinging open, like someone had just walked out. But nothing was missing. Nothing. Except the spare key. I was 18 when my parents went away on a week-long anniversary trip. My older sister had already moved out, so I had the entire house to myself. I didn't mind. I was independent and used to being alone. Our house was secluded, surrounded by dense woods, with a long dirt driveway leading up to the main road. The road itself was quiet, with large properties spaced far apart. Everyone in town knew each other, so it wasn't unusual to see familiar faces at the grocery store, the gas station, or even the local bars, though I wasn't old enough to go to those yet. This story starts with something seemingly normal, a stop at the gas station. I had just finished refueling my car when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up at the pump next to mine. A man in his late 40s with a scruffy goatee and a baseball cap stepped out and greeted me casually. Around here, that wasn't unusual. As he filled his tank, he turned to me. "Hey, do you know how to get to the interstate from here?" I gave him directions, but instead of just listening, he pulled out a notepad and started writing them down. It struck me as odd. Who writes directions down these days instead of using their phone? "Thanks," he said, then added, "You from around here?" "Yeah, I grew up here." He nodded, smiling slightly. "I'm from out of town." That was the last thing he said before getting back in his car. I got into mine and drove off first, heading home. As I turned onto my driveway, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. The black Jeep Cherokee was still behind me. He didn't slow down or stop, he just drove past, continuing down the road. But something felt wrong. He had just asked for directions to the interstate, yet he was now going the complete opposite way. I shook off the unease, convincing myself he just got confused. That night, I had plans to meet up with friends. As I walked out to my car, I heard footsteps in the woods nearby. I froze, listening. Probably just an animal, I told myself. I got in my car and left without checking. But when I came back home a few hours later, something happened that I can never forget. As I stepped out of my car, a man's voice called out from the woods. "Kate?" I went ice cold. My name. Someone in the darkness was calling my name. I didn't wait. I bolted inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My breathing was ragged as I pressed my back against the wall. I knew all of my neighbors, and none of them would just call out to me like that, especially not from the woods. I called my parents, telling them what had happened. "Maybe it's just a neighbor," my dad said. "If they really need something, they'll knock on the door." I didn't mention the man at the gas station. The next day, I stayed inside most of the time, still unsettled by what happened. But later that evening, I had to go out again. As I was walking to my car, it happened again. "Kate?" This time, I sprinted back inside and locked the door. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone and called 911. 2 officers arrived and searched the property. When they returned, they told me they didn't find anything, but to call again if it happened again. Their response didn't make me feel any safer. I stayed inside the whole next day, only leaving for work. I was a server at a nearby restaurant, working the late shift. Nothing strange happened that morning, and I convinced myself that maybe it really was just a neighbor messing around. That night, I finished work exhausted and ready to collapse into bed. As I pulled into my driveway, I stepped out and started walking toward the front door. Then, I heard it again. "Kate." This time, there was something different about the voice. It was closer. And then, "Don't call the cops on me again, cutie." I froze. Chills crawled up my spine as I turned toward the woods. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew he was there, watching. I forced myself to move, running inside and locking the door. My hands were shaking as I called 911 again. The police came back, searched again, and found nothing. My parents told me I should stay at a friend's house for the night, and I couldn't agree more. I packed a small bag and peeked through the windows to make sure I was alone before stepping outside. I locked the door quickly and sprinted to my car. I turned the key in the ignition and heard a sound right next to my window. I turned my head and saw a man in a black ski mask trying to open my car door. For a split second, my body wouldn't move. It was like my brain refused to process what was happening. Then he started banging on the glass with his elbow. Adrenaline kicked in. I threw the car into drive and sped down the driveway, barely able to breathe. I didn't stop until I reached my friend Alex's house. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard they hurt. Alex and her dad were already waiting outside after I had frantically called them. Her dad was furious, saying he would have come to pick me up had he known what was happening. Together, we called the police again. This time, they took it more seriously. Officers went back to my house to investigate while another came to Alex's place to take my full statement. They never found him. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, no broken windows. But I knew what I saw, and I knew what I heard. My parents came home the next day, and for the first time I felt safe again. But I knew deep down that I had barely escaped something far worse. I fully believe that the man at the gas station followed me home that day. He knew I was alone. He knew my name, and he toyed with me before he finally tried to grab me. Looking back, I should have never given him my real name. I should have noticed that he was following me home. I was lucky, because some people aren't. That experience was the final push I needed. I moved into my own apartment a few months later, and to this day, I never go anywhere alone without watching my back. I was home alone one night for a reason I don't remember. I think my family had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me in charge of the house. I was 15 or 16 at the time, a total gamer, and completely obsessed with StarCraft. Whenever I had the house to myself, I'd stay up late, glued to my screen, barely aware of the world around me. That night was no different. I was in my bedroom on the first floor, headphones on, fully immersed in my game. The only light in the house came from my computer monitor, casting a dim blue glow across my room. Then the doorbell rang. Twice. It was past 10 p.m. and I wasn't expecting anyone. My stomach twisted with unease, but I hurried to the front door, not wanting to be away from my game for too long. "Who is it?" I called, my voice steady but cautious. A soft, weak voice answered, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like an older woman. I flipped on the porch light and opened the door just a crack, keeping the storm door locked between us. Standing there was a frail-looking elderly woman with a big, unsettling smile on her face. She had her hands hidden behind her back. "Can I help you?" I asked through the glass. She smiled wider. "I need to use a phone. May I come inside?" That immediately set off alarms in my head. Ever since I was a kid, my parents drilled it into me. Never let a stranger into the house. Not even women. I hesitated, feeling awkward about turning her away, but something about her felt wrong. There's a library a few blocks down," I stammered. "I'm sure they have a phone." Her smile didn't waver, but her tone changed. Cold, almost angry. "That's very rude," she said, her voice still oddly sweet. "Turning away an old lady who just needs help." I swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, but my parents don't allow me to let strangers in." I started closing the door, muttering another apology, and she just stood there, still smiling. But somehow her grin felt more menacing. I locked the door and walked back to my room, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. Then the doorbell rang again. I froze. There was no way in hell I was opening the door this time. Something was off about that woman. Maybe she was confused, maybe she had dementia, or maybe she was dangerous. I shook it off and went back to my game, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see her staring through my window. And then I heard it. A clinking sound. A sharp, rhythmic tapping on the window right in front of me. I went completely still. My blinds were drawn, so I couldn't see outside. But I knew she was out there. I muted my game and listened. Tap, tap, tap. Something metal was tapping against the glass. I didn't move. My room was the only one with the light on. She knew I was in here. My heart was racing. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what was on the other side of that thin layer of glass. Instead, I turned off my monitor, plunged my room into darkness, and crept out. I made my way to the living room, heart pounding in my ears, and sank into the couch, hiding in the shadows. Then, the doorbell rang again. Then again. I clenched my fists. This woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat. Maybe she really was lost, confused, in need of help. But deep down, I knew better. After a third ring, I made up my mind. I was going to open the door and tell her to leave. I crept back to the front entrance, took a deep breath, and swung the door open, only to find a different person standing there. A man. He looked about 10 years younger than her. Tall, lean, and expressionless. "Have you seen my mother?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. My throat was dry. "Yeah, she came to my door earlier." He sighed, shaking his head. "She has dementia, she wandered off, I'm so sorry." I almost felt bad, but then he asked something that made my stomach drop. "Can I come inside for a minute?" "Why?" I hesitated. Why did he need to come inside? I told him, just like I had told the woman, that my parents didn't allow strangers in the house. His face didn't change. "Well, can I at least check the backyard?" he asked. I nodded quickly, eager to get rid of him. Yeah, sure. She might have gone back there. He thanked me and walked around the side of the house. I never saw him go into the backyard. I peeked through the window, expecting to see him searching for her, but he was gone. Both of them were. That night, I locked every door, every window, and curled up under my blankets. Then, in the dead of night, tap, tap, tap. I shot upright. The clinking was back. I forced myself to look. I lifted the blinds just enough to see outside. She was there. The woman, standing at my window, grinning, and in her hand, a kitchen knife. She was tapping it against the glass. I yanked the blinds down and crawled into bed, heart hammering. Then the doorbell rang 4 times in a row. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. This wasn't a confused old lady. This was a trap. I stayed awake until morning. Eventually, the noises stopped. When my dad called the next day, I told him everything. You did the right thing, he said. You never should have opened the door in the first place. Looking back, I still wonder, was she really mentally ill? Or was it all an act to get inside? Why did the man disappear instead of looking for her? Why was she tapping a knife on my window? I don't know, but I do know one thing. If I had let her in, I don't think I would be here to tell this story.